It was quite alarming what the white paper wanted to do to heritage. To put it bluntly, it wanted to annihilate heritage. The planning white paper was so brutal in its conception and so obviously biased in favour of development that poor heritage was going to be swept aside. Nowhere in any of the written material was anything ever discussed about local heritage. It was all based on the Heritage Act, which most people don't realise only covers about 15 or 1600 buildings, whereas if you take all the locally listed items in New South Wales, along with all the conservation areas as well, you end up with approximately 40,000 buildings. So you would have had potentially the great majority of listed buildings almost having no protection overnight. You know, we're talking about our schools, we're talking about our police stations, we're talking about our fire stations, we're talking about houses, we're talking about office buildings. The great majority of the listed stock in New South Wales, 40,000 compared to 1,600, were potentially going to simply lose the legislation that protects them, and that was pretty devastating. During the advertising period of the legislation, where people like myself were invited to comment on it, there was very little information that was being provided by the government. As it happened, the legislation got defeated in the upper house, so it never came into being, but it's still there, it's still potentially pending. But the point about it is that it was disingenuous. It did not consult with the community in a meaningful fashion. I mean, there were obviously meetings with the community, various communities, but where it counted most, and where I think there was something like 6,000 responses during the advertising period, there was never a summary of any of those objections.